in association with Omega.
I'm Pauline Chu in Hong Kong, and this is CNN.
Closed for business. The U.S. government shutdown begins after lawmakers failed to sign off on a new budget. I'm Maggie Lake in New York. Nina Santos is in London. Welcome to World Business Today.
Nearly 1 million U.S. workers are losing out on pay as federal agencies stay shut for lack of funds. We'll find out how it could impact the world's biggest economy.
A bigger threat on the horizon, a possible default on the U.S. public finances. We'll talk to a former presidential advisor coming up.
And Abenomics in action. Japan announces a $50 billion economic stimulus package to soften the blow of a rise in sales tax.
Well, the shutdown is in effect and the blame game is on. The U.S. Congress failed to agree on a spending bill before the start of the new fiscal year. Now, for the first time since 1996, many government agencies are suspending operations. This is the scene of the crime. Capitol Hill in Washington, the Democrat-controlled Senate and the Republican-controlled House of Representatives are still at odds over the president's reform of U.S. health care known as Obamacare. That is the main issue keeping them from passing a new spending plan. The people bearing the brunt of the shutdown, U.S. federal workers. Hundreds of thousands will be on unpaid leave until a budget is set. That will cost them about $1 billion a week in unpaid wages. Politicians are divided over what to do about it. This is what some of them had to say.
Unfortunately, Congress has not fulfilled its responsibility. It's failed to pass a budget. And as a result, much of our government must now shut down until Congress funds it again.
The House has made its position known very clearly. We believe that we should fund the government, and we think there ought to be basic fairness for all Americans under Obamacare. The Senate has continued to reject our offers, but under the Constitution, there's a way to resolve this process, and that is to go to conference and talk through your differences.
Senator Murray has for more than 6 months requested a conference on the budget, 18 times. So we like to resolve issues, but we will not go to conference with a gun to our head.
Well, all of this hasn't had a huge effect on the world stock markets, although I might point out it did have the dollar down against both the euro and also the British pound. If you take a look at the snapshot of how the markets are doing in today's session, as you can see, they're mostly up despite the prospect of a U.S. government shutdown. As you can see, it's only the markets in Australia that closed many hours ago that fell, as well as the FTSE 100. That has to do with a number of corporate earnings rather than a broader trend. U.S. futures are up mainly because investors are betting that the shutdown is likely to be short-lived. Analysts and investors are mostly concerned about the U.S. debt ceiling, which is another twin evil that is looming too. The Treasury Secretary, Jack Lew, has warned that the country is likely to reach its borrowing limit by October the 17th, Maggie.
It does seem counterintuitive, doesn't it, Nina, that stocks would be up. But let's go right to the trading floor to try to clear this up. Allison Cossack is standing by at the New York Stock Exchange. And Allison, for people looking at this, the government shuts down, Congress in disarray, and yet stock futures are up. Explain to us why that is.
Well, I'm not going to explain. I've got Mark Newton here. He's the chief technical analyst with Gray Wolf Execution Partners. Why are we seeing stocks up the day after the government shuts down? Now, we did see a sell-off yesterday, so is it already priced in, or is the thinking that this shutdown isn't really going to impact economic growth?
Well, we just shut down, Allison, so it's tough to say that today happened specifically because the government shut down. A lot of this isn't priced in yet. It's just a minor blip in futures. Historically, things like this have been bearish for stocks while they're still ongoing, and then once they're resolved, usually futures tend to rally afterwards. And so if you look back at times like 1995 or 1990 or 1987, stocks had fallen prior to the government shutting down, and after it was resolved, we rallied. My thinking is, since the two sides are so far apart yet, it could be very similar to the time in the 1970s, like 76, 77, 78, where the sell-off actually was ongoing. Because the government shutdown lasted 8 to 10 days. It was much longer than just a couple days. And from my thinking right now, it's tough because the two sides are still very far apart and haven't really made steps to come together just yet.
And so what is the biggest risk of the shutdown?
Well, the biggest risk is that the longer it lasts, the more it's going to take off from GDP. So we know that takes about 15 basis points a week off of GDP. Morgan Stanley wrote a report on that recently, and that's something that's a big concern for people. I think that a lot of people haven't really been worried all that much about this. It's more of just frustration and disgruntlement about the fact that the two sides can't come together, more so than any real fear. You know, we just finished the month of September, and we were up nearly 3% for the month, in a month that historically has been down almost 1% and up 5% for the quarter. So the market certainly doesn't seem to show any real signs of fear or concern about this government shutdown as of yet.
No fear or concern about the shutdown, but what about fear and concern about the debt ceiling coming up?
Well, that's a bigger deal, and there's going to be further wrangling with regards to the debt ceiling. I think the real key for Republicans is really not letting go of the spending caps and trying to keep spending under control, and they've already relented a bit, and most recently about $18 billion was added to that as of next year. For my thinking, 2014 spending has been raised to close to $980 billion or so, up from $967, I believe. So you have to keep spending under control. Republicans obviously want to keep spending down, cutting taxes, try to get rid of Obamacare, which is probably less of a concern than keeping spending down. We're going to see. The two sides are very far apart. I don't see things being able to come to the table all that quickly just yet. So there's going to be some back and forth.
You know, many economists are saying they see an October sell-off followed by a Santa Claus rally. Do you see this kind of thing happening?
Historically, it's paid to bet on the market, particularly during the months of November and December. We still aren't out of the woods yet, I think, in October. The trend has been down since mid-September. Momentum is bearish. There's still a lot of complacency out there. Sentiment is high, so I still see an above-average chance of a sell-off in October, probably until the beginning of November, and then we probably can rally.
Okay, Mark Newton, thanks so much. Maggie, I'll throw it back to you.
All right, Allison, thank you so much. So a lot of complacency out there. What happens now? That's the big question. Let's bring in CNN senior political analyst David Gergen. He's a former advisor to President Nixon, Ford, Reagan, and Clinton. Years of experience. We're going to need it. He joins us from Cambridge, Massachusetts. David, great to see you today. You know, it's interesting. It seems that people are sort of taking this shutdown in stride. Certainly investors, I think because they think it's going to somehow force the two sides to come to some sort of agreement and avoid a real problem with the debt ceiling, which is much more serious. Do you see that happening? Do these look like two sides that show any sign of compromise?
I don't see any sign of compromise right now, but what I do see is a lot of public anger. You can see it on social media. They're angry at both sides, mostly at Republicans. Republicans are taking a huge amount of blame for this. And I think that pressure that's going to come from the heartland of this country, maybe not from Wall Street yet, but if this goes on, it will start coming from the street. It will certainly come from CEOs and small businesses. I think that's going to crack this thing open eventually. One side's going to back down. It's very likely going to be the Republicans in the next few days. So the big question is, what lessons do people take out of this as they look toward default? The hope is, and I think the silver lining could be, that this purges a lot of the partisanship, the poison that's in Washington, and that both sides, and especially the leadership on both sides, can get control of their caucuses. John Boehner needs to get control if he's going to get this settled, and that we can avoid default because we'll purge the system of all this poison. In other words, we're doing something terribly stupid right now. It's utterly stupid, but doing something utterly stupid might help prevent us from doing something truly dangerous, and that is a default.
That's putting some faith in Congress. I don't know if I feel that optimistic right now, David. Look at what's going on. This is a dangerous game of chicken to play. You have spent years and years in Washington. Is there something different going on now that we cannot seem to have a Congress that's functioning?
You know, we've said for some years in Washington that things seem to be getting worse. They were getting worse. Clearly, they couldn't get any worse than they were 5 years ago, and now they have. And yes, I think this is qualitatively different from what we've had back in the 70s or the 80s, even in the 90s, when Bill Clinton was facing off against Newt Gingrich, the Republican leader, and they were eventually able to settle. There's a picture in the Wall Street Journal today from the 1995 shutdown. President Clinton and Vice President Gore in the Oval Office with the Republican leader Bob Dole and the Republican leader Newt Gingrich, all shaking hands, getting it settled. And there's just none of that going on right now. Nobody is. President Obama is on the sidelines at the request of Senate Democrats. He's taking very little low-key view. But nobody's called, you know, you'd think on a day like this, normally the leaders would be called to the White House, let's get this done. I continue to believe that's what ought to happen. But that old tradition, those old traditions have disappeared, I'm afraid. We've settled into a near anarchy right now in Washington.
And those are words that are very unsettling to investors. Although they seem to be calm now, David, I fear that they're going to let their voice be heard as well. And let's hope we don't get to that point. David Gergen, thank you so much.
Well, let me just say this. If the investors are angry, if they do show that, it's going to settle this more quickly. So there's a silver lining if the markets start to become much more volatile.
That will be. And we certainly saw that during the global financial crisis with the rejection of TARP. But what that does, the lasting effect on investor sentiment, Wall Street gets over it, politicians get over it. The average investor out there really doesn't. There is a lasting price to pay when that's how you govern, I would say. David Gergen, thank you so much for sharing
Maggie.
your insight. Appreciate it. Nina?
Yeah, interesting quote there from him, wasn't it? A choice between what's stupid and downright dangerous doesn't exactly inspire confidence for world investors who are putting billions on the line, does it, Maggie? Well, you're watching World Business Today. Coming up next, though, Japan's Prime Minister gives with one hand and takes with the other. New measures to rebalance the economy are being unveiled in Tokyo. We'll have the full details after this break.
Human to Hero, in association with Nikon.
My name is Adam Van Couverden. I'm 31 years old, from Toronto, Canada, and I'm a sprint kayaker. I've won 4 Olympic medals for Canada, a gold, 2 silvers, and a bronze. I'm 2-time world champion and 26-time World Cup champion. I love the lifestyle of being an athlete. You know, I like getting up and having my first objective of the day being primarily physical. Canoe kayak is a full-time job, like most sports, that you're going to focus on to try and be world-class. So I think it's important for athletes to recognize how fortunate we are, because we're all really, really lucky. Staying cognizant of that is very, very important, so that we're all making sure that we're contributing to the big picture.
To see a new world, we try. To see a new world, we explore. To see a new world, we don't give up. We try and try. Maybe it's because we want to see a new world. Let's try together, and let's go see a new world.
I think people are troubled by it. It's not good from an image point of view. The government does look as though it's in stasis, nowhere to go. But really, the crucial issue is how long will it take the politicians to sort out this crisis and come to an agreement, and of course deal with the debt ceiling crisis that we have coming down the road as well.
Reaction there to the U.S. government shutdown from Martin Sorrell, the CEO of marketing giant WPP. And Nina, you know, what's the reaction where you are? We keep saying investors seem like they're sort of in wait-and-see mode, aren't they?
Certainly in wait-and-see mode until the October the 17th debt deadline looms, because that's really the biggie, because those investor payments to payments on interest to the United States, gargantuan amount of debt to investors will be on the line then. So that really is the pressure point. But reaction to the US government shutdown has been, Maggie, pretty subdued on the European stock market so far, and indeed on the Asian markets as well. New economic reports out this morning, especially from the manufacturing sector across the whole of Europe, have given some reason for optimism. The Purchasing Managers Index, as measured by the financial research house Market, shows that factory activity in the Eurozone did manage to continue to expand for the pace of September, but not quite as quickly as people had been expecting. I might point out these figures that came out today indicated the 3rd straight month of growth for the manufacturing sector, which has been decimated by the Eurozone crisis. When it comes to figures for the big powerhouse of manufacturing across this region, Germany alone, they show a similar picture of growth. The index for the month of September coming in at 51.1. That is indicating expansion, because remember, any number that's above 50 means that the sector is still growing. So that's good news, but not quite as good as some people had hoped. We also got new figures coming out of the unemployment Bureau there across the Eurozone, showing that held steady at a record of 12% for the month of August. Separately, and more worryingly, the jobless rate is also rising in Europe's largest economy. So this brings me back to Germany, because a new Labour report by the German government shows that unemployment rose in September to 6.9% from 6.8% in August, and that almost misses the point, because the real issue is that people were expecting the unemployment rate to fall by around about 5,000 fewer people asking for jobless benefits. Over the month of September, it actually soared by 25,000. So that is the real worrying sign, the big spike in German unemployment that was supposed to be the most robust economy of the lot. Well, let's move a bit further afield, because in Japan, the latest report from the central bank over there was more upbeat than expected. The quarterly Tankan survey said that sentiment among the large manufacturers in this country was actually at its highest pace in around about 6 years. And following that positive data, the government also said that the time was right now to raise its sales tax as a way of lowering the government debt. Remember, they've been stimulating the economy for some time now. Prime Minister Shinzo Abe said that the tax will go up from 5% to 8% as of April the 1st, 2014. That's the first increase we've seen since all the way back in 1997. But to offset the impact on the economy, he did decide to pump an extra $51 billion into Japan's ailing economy. The PM said that Japan is at last emerging from that long, hard economic slump.
Japan's shrinking mentality, nurtured by the 15-year-long deflation, is changing. We will go forward decisively with bold economic policies to further solidify this chance of economic recovery. With that, we can pursue both economic revival and fiscal integration at the same time. This is my conclusion.
Well, here's how the markets in the Asia-Pacific region ended the day. As you can see, largely positive note to the end of the day. Despite the US government shut down, these markets put on a gain of around about 0.7% for the Sensex over there in India, and the Tokyo Nikkei being lifted by the Tankan survey coming up better than expected, although ending the day up just around about 1/5%. Markets in Hong Kong and Shanghai were closed for a public holiday, and that meant that volumes are pretty light in some of these markets. And despite that, China's official figures on factory activity did come out earlier on Tuesday, and they showed modest growth for the month of September. The reading was a little bit lower than forecast, and again, Maggie, that replicates the kind of situation that we're seeing here in Europe. Growth in the manufacturing sector, but for the month of September, not quite as robust as some had hoped.
Yeah, we keep getting these swoons after progress. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. More to come on World Business Today. A wide range of business leaders weigh in on the deadlock in Washington. We'll tell you what they think of the shutdown next.
It's a new dawn, a brave new world, a world where you can achieve anything at all if you believe in yourself. Technology has leveled the playing field, bringing us all closer together, so that the thoughts that you had today can be communicated in a nanosecond, anywhere in the world. At Glow, every day we set out with the most extensive fiber optic network in the region to provide you with the inspiration and the right tools so that you can be whatever you want to be, because we believe there are no limits to what you can achieve. And today, your world of opportunity is simply unlimited.
Business leaders are urging members of Congress to get their act together. They want a quick solution not only on the budget crisis, but also on the debt ceiling battle that is coming down the pike later this month. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce and a number of business groups have sent a letter to Congress saying the shutdown will leave the economy in a vulnerable state at a critical time. On Wednesday, President Obama meets with the heads of the big U.S. banks, including Lloyd Blankfein of Goldman Sachs and Jamie Dimon of J.P. Morgan Chase. They will urge Republicans to raise the debt ceiling with no strings attached. But some people say it'll take more than a letter from top business figures to end this stalemate. David Stockman, a former White House budget director, said nothing will be resolved until we get a big market sell-off.
We're going to have a thundering crisis. We're going to have debt ceiling crises. We're going to have CR crises. We're going to have multi-thousand-point market meltdowns before the dreamwalkers in the Beltway down there wake up and realize they have to deal with reality and not continue to kick the can.
David Stockman spoke to me on Monday's Quest Means Business. He says Washington's paralysis will only intensify until Congress deals realistically with big issues like reforming entitlements and overhauling Social Security. Nina, it's worth pointing out that at this point in time, we don't want to be alarmist about this. Most people think the default on U.S. debt is still a very small, remote possibility. But I think Stockman is speaking to the huge amount of frustration coming across the business and investment community that they're fighting this fight related to health care law. They don't see that tied to the massive fiscal problems we have here. And when you have somebody warning that you need to see a free fall in the markets before Washington gets their act together, that is very scary stuff.
It's really scary stuff, especially from where I'm sitting, where we spent 3 years covering the Eurozone crisis. And, you know, repeatedly politicians couldn't get their act together, despite the fact that their bond markets were in free fall. And that meant that debt became even more expensive to service. I might say there's a slight irony in the whole fact that this is an argument brewing surrounding the Obamacare package of reforms there to the healthcare laws in the United States, because a lot of people here where I am would often think the world's richest country, perhaps it should have health care for free, and the world's richest country, should it be holding everybody else hostage because of its own political wrangling, Maggie?
That's right. And there is going to be an issue of credibility. We are going to talk about Congress and the polls. The American people, the frustration is everywhere, are not in favor of this at all. They're really frustrated. We had them on air all morning. So we're going to continue to watch this. Again, everyone holding out hope that this event is going to prevent a larger issue with the debt ceiling. We're going to talk about that a little bit more coming up in the show. But we do want to focus on one part of the spending issue. Let's go actually to Washington, D.C., where Breonna Keeler is standing by at the White House. Breonna, here we are. The government is shut down. You are still working. Is there anything on the schedule today? Is anything happening that would lead us to believe that we could have a break in this impasse?
Well, no. If you look at the president's public schedule today, he has really sort of, I guess, one public event really that we'll be keeping an eye on, and that is that he's meeting with beneficiaries of Obamacare, because today is, in a way, kind of the launch day for Obamacare. This is the day that those health insurance exchanges open. So he'll have that. Now, it's, of course, possible, Maggie, that we will see other developments, things change on his schedule. It seems like that would be likely, considering that there's so much attention, obviously, on the shutdown going on. The Senate is going to be reconvening here along with the House here in the next half hour. But in terms of any sort of back and forth going on between Senate Democrats and House Republicans, no. The last thing that happened was House Republicans really talking about wanting to work out some sort of compromise with Senate Democrats, and Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid, the leading Democrat in the Senate, saying, you know what, if you want to do that, if you want to talk about some budgetary issues and some related items to this, go ahead and pass a funding bill for the next six weeks, and then we'll talk. So still an impasse.
Breonna, we had David Gergen on earlier, who said that the president's keeping a slightly lower profile, sort of letting the members of Congress take the lead on that. Is that expected to continue? Is that what we're going to see? Is that sort of how the White House is positioning this? Because there's always that risk that he's accused of not showing leadership to try to bring these two sides together, and there could be potential backlash from that, especially from the American people who are confused and frustrated.
So there's nothing, as we noted, Maggie, yeah, there's nothing that is public on his schedule yet. But I do think that when you saw last night, he addressed to the camera as if he was talking to military families, assuring them that they would be protected in the case of a shutdown. I think it would not be unusual for President Obama, what he's done in the past when there's impasses like this. He will have events where he highlights particular people, particular segments of the American public that are most impacted by, in this case, a shutdown. So I think that might be something that will happen. But of course, the White House at this point hasn't really rolled out any sort of concerted campaign. For now, what you have Senate Democrats as well as the White House doing is sort of, I don't want to say taking advantage of, but sort of trying to highlight the divisions that are in the House Republican Conference, because there are some folks feel differently in that group about whether or not this is a good idea. And so I think the White House and Senate Democrats feel that maybe trying to put the pressure on them and highlight that may be more effective in the long run than perhaps giving some major concessions when it comes to Obamacare. President Obama doesn't want to really tinker with or change in any substantive way his signature health care reform law.
All right, and meanwhile, Wall Street and the world is watching. Brianna Killer with the very latest from Washington. Thank you so much, Brianna. Nina?
Maggie, still to come here on the show, we broaden out from the United States to see what investors in the world's emerging markets are making of America's big shutdown.
And we are moments away from the start of a new session on Wall Street. We'll find out if the markets remain calm at the open, as calm as they seem with the futures. We'll be right back.
The Economist's events, hosting the EU Balkan Summit, which aims to demonstrate ways in which the Balkan countries can pave the way to recovery and growth. Don't miss the opportunity for an open dialogue with politicians, decision makers, businessmen, and key analysts from the region. 17th and 18th of October, Sofia, Bulgaria.
It's a new dawn in Africa, and our enormous potential and opportunities are being harnessed by one bank. UBA, United Bank for Africa, stands strong as the bank of choice for Africans and Africa-related businesses, uniting African people and businesses with the world. So, make the wise choice today. Bank with UBA, Africa's global bank.
Connect the world with Becky Anderson. Quest means business. Armand Paul. It's your new evening lineup tonight on CNN.
As the clouds roll in across the Mediterranean, you'll still find it easy to drift away. World's 5-star airline.
This is getting you up close.
This is my aunt Zulobia, who thankfully escaped from Nakumat as the shooting was going on. You grew up here too. How do you feel?
Oh, I grew up here, and it has been sort of a petrifying experience for me. This is just utterly devastating and unbelievable of what I'm seeing.
It's just a really surreal experience. We're happy that she's okay. We're unhappy to see what's happening here in Nairobi.
Yeah.
This is CNN.
Start spreading the news. I'm leaving today. I wanna be a part of it. New York, New York.
Quest Means Business. New city, new time. Weeknights on CNN.
I'm Nina Dos Santos in London, and this is CNN.
There is the opening bell at the NASDAQ and the New York Stock Exchange. The U.S. government is shut down, but markets are open. It is the beginning of a new month and a new quarter. Welcome back to World Business Today. We are live from London and New York. And as you can see, as we get the first print there on U.S. markets, we are seeing some very slight gains, despite the fact that there is a lot of frustration and uncertainty looming over just what this government shutdown will do to the economy, how long it will last, and if this tells us or informs us of anything on how the negotiations over the debt ceiling are going to go. So a lot of worry in the backdrop, but right now investors sort of taking to the sideline. I wouldn't put too much stock in the fact that we are seeing some gains. A lot of people hoping that a shutdown means they're going to get their act together and avoid something more serious with the debt crisis, but not right now. That is more of a hope than a reality. Of course, the big story that investors are focusing on, we have been talking about all show, that U.S. government has shut down. Congress was unable to pass a bill to keep the government funded when the new fiscal year began just over 9 hours ago. Now some 800,000 federal employees are forced to take unpaid leave. The last time the U.S. government shut down was nearly 18 years ago. Republican Senator John McCain remembers that. He told CNN why he thinks this shutdown is worse.
Americans don't like government. They don't like Congress. They don't like the government, but they don't want it shut down. And when, in '95, when we shut down the government last time, we had already passed a number of appropriations bills. So the impact of a shutdown of a government, since we haven't passed a single appropriations bill, will be a more immediate and more impactful.
Let's take a closer look at what the shutdown means. Christine Romans is here in New York for more on that. Christine, we see stocks up slightly. We've heard from some investors. Is the market being too complacent about the risks?
I agree with you absolutely, Maggie, that we shouldn't put too much stock in what's happening right now, because we have a rough couple of days, weeks, maybe even months ahead of us here as this budget drama continues. Right now, the focus is on the shutdown. Yesterday's big sell-off seems to have priced in the fact that we had a shutdown and that now we have to watch and figure out what's going to happen next. Look, a shutdown is going to cost money, no question. It's going to be $1 billion out of federal workers' payrolls per week. You've seen these estimates from Moody's that go all the way up to about $55 billion for an economic cost of a shutdown if it drags on for a month. But the shutdown is what is kind of the least of our worries. If the shutdown is setting a stage for a very vicious and nasty battle over raising the debt ceiling, Maggie, then I think, look, Congress could do a lot to hurt your 401k right here or to hurt global markets. You still have stocks up 18, 20, 24% so far this year. How can you stay up with those kinds of lofty gains for the year if you have a Congress that might not extend the borrowing authority of the United States Treasury? So we've got some rough sledding here, I'd say.
You know, Christine, I hear people saying this sort of slightly strange scenario that somehow if the market starts to sell off and tank, that legislators in Washington will see that and be scared and do something. I think people replay that scene from TARP where we started sinking like a stone, down 800 points, and then they quickly pass something. You don't always get the chance to put the genie back in the bottle. There is collateral damage when you start to have the markets in free fall. That is not a situation that seems to me be the way we're going to handle this.
And what does that say about lawmakers and policymakers in this country, that it takes something catastrophic to be felt by Main Street before they'll actually do something that's good for Main Street? And the TARP example, the bank bailout example, is a very good example. You can remember they weren't going to do that rescue of the banks until the stock market opened up and was down 700 points. And then suddenly everyone went rushing back to the table. And I heard this yesterday and last night. I heard a lot of people saying we're going to watch and see how the markets are tomorrow. Maybe that'll push us closer to having to get something done. That was sort of the operating assumption among the people who were watching everything happening on Wall Street last night, or on, sorry, in Washington last night. You did not get a big sell-off this morning yet. You had Asian markets that were pretty, China was closed. We had Asian markets that were pretty, they were solid, that held in there. Everyone's looking forward to the debt ceiling fight. And one thing that's critical here, I think, Maggie, in a shutdown, Medicare, doctors are going to be paid for the health care for seniors, right? They'll be reimbursed. Seniors here will get their Social Security checks. People will get their disability checks. There was a law that was passed last night to make sure that veterans would get their checks on time as well. Banking stays open. This is why they're calling it a partial shutdown. So Main Street might not feel this shutdown right away. But in a debt default, Maggie, Main Street would feel it. Social Security, Medicare checks, all of these things that are the visible functioning of a government could go away very, very quickly. By the time Main Street feels it, and I hope Washington is listening, by the time Main Street feels it, it is too late. You have now sent a signal that is so dangerous to the markets and so dangerous to the capital markets in particular. You could spike up your interest rates, then your borrowing costs go up, and a problem that began by a hatred of debt deficits and a lack of fiscal discipline in Washington makes our debt and deficits worse.
Right.
That's the irony.
And this is why people call it absolute lunacy. And you're absolutely right. That's something you watch for. You don't get a chance to play that scene over again. No. They got past it once. They were able to stabilize things. It is such a dangerous game of chicken. Let's hope they don't go right up to the line. Christine, I know you're up all night covering it. We appreciate you being on. And Nina, when I was just talking to Christine about this, her and I talk about this a lot. It's the collateral damage. It's the unintended consequences, not just what happens in the U.S. if you start to see markets in disarray. What happens to emerging markets? What happens to interest rates elsewhere in the world? I mean, there are ripple effects that lawmakers should not gamble with.
There are massive ripple effects, particularly for the world's emerging markets, Maggie, because they're heavily skewed towards the commodities space. Right. They export commodities, they buy commodities. All of those commodities are priced in dollars, which the US president has been keen to remind everybody throughout the course of this crisis is the world's reserve currency. Let's have a look at how the markets in Europe are faring before we get to the emerging markets. Still mostly higher as investors managed to shrug off that US shutdown. Even Milan's benchmark index is higher despite the ongoing political gridlock in Italy, just as we were saying earlier on in the show. As one country is facing a government shutdown, the other country, on the other side of the planet, this time Italy, is potentially facing the prospect of ending the week without a government, because that could collapse after a no-confidence vote, which will be going through Parliament tomorrow in Rome. And when it comes to the Asia-Pacific stock markets, a positive survey of manufacturing sentiment lifted the Japanese market. That's the Tankan survey. Chinese final PMI readings for the month of September also came in buoyant, but not quite as good as some people are expecting, at a reading of 51.1, slight improvement from the month of August. But it still feels a little bit short of estimates, just like the kind of figures we're seeing here in Europe on the manufacturing side. Must point out, volumes are pretty light in today's session because markets in the main hub of trading activity in Hong Kong were shut, as well as markets shut in Shanghai for a public holiday in both of those two locations. Well, speaking of Shanghai, let's get back to the topic of those emerging markets. They saw a big sell-off on Monday's session ahead of Washington's midnight deadline, which we know now has come and passed without a deal being struck. They're doing okay now that the government shutdown is underway, but let's put a little bit of meat on the bones here. John Defterios joins us now live from CNN Abu Dhabi. John, we can't forget that the emerging markets have done particularly well out of quantitative easing.
Indeed, and in fact, that's been the driving force for those markets. And when the Federal Reserve, in fact, Nina, was suggesting they were going to pull back, then the emerging markets sold off. The Federal Reserve came back in and said, we don't have to taper right now, and this led to a rally. Now they have to deal with the budget wrangling that took place over the weekend. 24 hours ago, we saw huge sell-offs in the emerging markets, Nina, of anywhere between 1% and 3%. It's amazing the mood today. In fact, it's a relative calm all about the budget impasse in Washington. We have a pretty good broad-based group of indices to take a look at here to give you a sense of how the market is trading today. In fact, we saw good manufacturing numbers coming out of Turkey. Look at the recovery after losing 2% yesterday. We see nearly a 1.75% gain today. Dubai's up 77% in 2013, so it's some profit taking here, down just a quarter. But again, India with a big sell-off yesterday, and the rupee still under pressure, but trading up 0.75%, and Russia trading up 0.5%. So major emerging markets, Istanbul, Russia, and India all trading higher. Brazil and Mexico were down sharply yesterday, so we're going to watch very carefully how they work through their morning sessions. But Brazil was down 2.6% yesterday, and Mexico down 1.7%. It seems, Nina, if you're in the vicinity of Washington right now in that emerging market space, it could dig in and hurt the region into Latin America because of slacking demand. Another interesting twist in the markets in the last hour of trading. We saw gold up $5 earlier in the session. It's now trading down $34. So some of the heat has come off of gold. There wasn't that panic buying that we saw earlier in the session. And even oil prices are tailing off at this juncture, the concern being perhaps that demand would tail off if the U.S. can't get through this budget impasse. It's trading at a 7-week low. But again, no panic like we saw yesterday. Investors are seeing this as mainly a political gesture, hurting U.S. credibility overseas in terms of leadership, but it doesn't have investors running for the door, Nina.
Yeah, certainly interesting, considering the world's biggest holder of U.S. Treasury bills is an emerging market itself, China, isn't it? So obviously, they're going to be watching this with very, very keen eyes, potentially a bit of political leverage from the world's emerging market, saying to the world's biggest market, you can't get your act together.
Yeah, indeed. And the other thing I think what's been a focus here is could the emerging markets start to recover? Because that was the big question with regards to the Federal Reserve and whether it was going to taper or not. Would there be enough domestic demand? So numbers that we saw out of China, not terrific, but still Purchasing Managers Index above 51. Turkey coming in at 54, or even seeing solid numbers from the emerging markets of Eastern Europe. So a turning of the tide here that perhaps we're starting to see a recovery in domestic demand in the emerging markets. They perhaps will not be so dependent on what the Federal Reserve does, but let's not downplay this at the same time. If this goes beyond 1, 2, 3 days, you can bet that the emerging markets will feel the pinch as investors start to realize that this may not be solved as quickly as they would like.
Yeah, it's all about the timing, isn't it? Especially as we head towards that other deadline,
Indeed.
which is October the 17th. John Defterios in Abu Dhabi, thanks so much for bringing us that complete review. Now, John was talking about the price of oil. It is indeed falling. As he said, Brent crude is trading near a 7-week low on the back of concerns that the U.S. government shutdown could affect demand. Remember that the United States is one of the biggest markets anywhere in the world for oil. The price of oil is currently selling for just over $107 a barrel. NYMEX crude is going for around about $101, Maggie.
And some news just into CNN. President Obama will give a statement in the Rose Garden at 12:25 today. We don't know what it's officially about, but you can believe a lot of people are going to be tuning in to see if he's making a comment about the shutdown. We were just talking to Brianna Keeler about that. Again, the president speaking at 12:25 Eastern. We will bring that to you live. Coming up on World Business Today, Audi is pushing a new diesel-powered car as a green alternative. We'll see Claire Danes in its new viral video and talk to the president of Audi of America about whether diesel is poised for a comeback.
Sail in time with Rolex, supporter of the International Sailing Federation.
Dawn on the Irish Sea revealed SCA still held the advantage, but their much more experienced rivals were now a real threat.
Now the wind's filling in from behind, so we were able to make some gains. It's good to be back in the race. We were 5.5 miles behind 17 miles ago, so I've got to be happy with that. I wonder whether we should try the other chute. A little bit more breeze coming. There's a blast in about 5 or 10 here, a nice healthy puff. They look light at the moment up there. Yeah.
Abu Dhabi skipper Ian Walker's demeanour said it all.
So I think we're ahead of them now. But... Okay, so we're about 1 mile ahead, 1.2.
It's never over until the finish line, and there's going to be a lot of snakes and ladders to be played between now and tomorrow morning.
Why this watch? This watch has seen gale-force winds, incredible sights, and craft and crew become one. It's marked the most challenging seas, the longest nights, and charted a course for the bravest of brave. It doesn't just tell time, it tells history.
And U.S. stocks have been open for about 15 minutes, and as you can see, we are sitting with very mild gains. Coming off a sell-off yesterday, looks like the shutdown was priced in, but what comes next is keeping investors on edge and in some cases on the sideline. Well, we'll get the latest figures on U.S. auto sales today. Industry analysts say we'll see the first year-on-year drop in sales in more than 2 years. The last time that happened was back in June 2011. Part of the problem wasn't the cars, but the calendar. U.S. Labor Day weekend, which is a holiday weekend, a big shopping period, was actually split up this year between August and September. So some of those sales were actually counted in August. So a little seasonal action impacting it.
Well, Maggie, the German car maker Audi is getting quite a bit of mileage out of a video advert for its new diesel-engine car. Actress Claire Danes stars in this video, and in one version of her trip, she's behind the wheel of an Audi. In the other, well, it's quite a bit less enjoyable because she's actually having a chauffeur-driven town car ride. The video has gotten more than 3 million hits on YouTube. I suppose the real point is that you want to be behind the wheel, Maggie, don't you, in the driving seat?
That's right, and driving something that goes a little further, I think, without giving away the plot. Anything Homeland is hot, that's for sure. But let's find out about the cars. The company says its new A-Series TDI cars are the most fuel-efficient models it's ever made. The president of Audi America, Scott Keogh, joins us now. Scott, thank you so much for being with us today. Before we get started on the car, I have to ask you,
Thank you.
Sure. Given the context of where we sit today with the government, U.S. government shutdown, a lot of people talking about being worried about what it's going to do to confidence. Cars are big ticket items. Are you concerned that this is going to hurt consumer confidence and impact sales?
Look, as you said, it is all about stability and it's about confidence. That is what we expect and need from a government. But actually, I'm an optimist. Car sales year to date have been strong. The dynamics of the market are still strong. So I'm going to err on the side of the fundamentals, which in my opinion are still good looking out towards the fourth quarter.
All right, we need some optimists on the show. We've had a lot of worry we've been talking about.
I agree.
Yeah, Scott, you know, I'm given this information about diesel. You've been unveiling these diesel cars. It's part of what's behind this ad campaign. To my knowledge, when I pull up into a gas station or a petrol station, that diesel pump is the one that nobody's at over in the corner while I sit in line and wait for the others. Why are we seeing a jump in diesel? Why are you putting so much emphasis on diesel?
Well, you know, you mentioned it, and it's a myth and a dynamic that we are slowly shattering here in the United States. Why we're putting emphasis on it is it works. In essence, a diesel car is 30% more fuel efficient, and we look at it very simplistically. The infrastructure is in place and ready to go, and the driver behavior is quite straightforward. You have to move from one pump to another, and that's going to drive the market. And truth be told, we are seeing mixes of approximately 30% in some of our cars. Technology is ready to go today, and it works. We just need to get more consumers on board with that.
Is there something fundamental that's changed about diesel? I mean, it had such a bad rap. It's only such a small fraction of U.S. cars. Is there something different going on?
You're exactly right. I think the biggest thing that is going on is the technology. Unfortunately, if you look back to the 70s and 80s, when diesels were brought to the U.S. market, they weren't ready for prime time. They were noisy, smoky, they vibrated, and they really didn't put their best foot forward. If you look at them at today, extremely high-tech, extremely high performance, and extremely fuel efficient. So we've got to break the myth from the 70s and get to today. And if you focus on today, it's technology that works. You know, a good example, just look at the European market. I mean, we have a number of European markets that are 70 to 80% every car we sell is diesel. We know Americans don't embrace all things from Europe, but we think this is one smart thing they can embrace from Europe.
Well, they certainly care very much about cars that have the latest technology, and they care a lot about fuel efficiency. We do know that. Are they sensitive to price? There is a time, again, I think there's some confusion where I've pulled up to the gas station and diesel's been more. How does the price comparison stack up? And is it an advantage or is it a disadvantage?
Absolutely, it's an advantage, and I think you have to look at the now price versus the longer-term price. Obviously, a diesel engine is a little bit more expensive than a conventional gasoline engine, and at the pump, as you've stated, it's a little more expensive. But again, 30% fuel efficiency, it pays back within months. So over the long term, it pays back. You know, but one of the things you mentioned, I think, is crucial. And what happens is the federal government taxes diesel fuel higher than conventional fuel. And we just think this is a classic example of the government picking at technology. Truth be told, they should tax them the same, let two technologies compete against each other, and let's see what happens. But at the end of the day, as it is right now, it absolutely pays off because 30% fuel economy can't be beat.
Well, you've obviously been changing some consumers' mind. Diesel sales up 24% in 2013. That's a pretty big number. Scott, we wish you the best of luck on that continuing success. Scott Keogh from Audi joining us.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Sure thing.
I must say, it's a completely different perspective if you're here where I am in Europe, Maggie. Tons of people at the diesel pump, but that's because it's taxed differently to the normal petrol pump. Well, the US drugs maker Merck says that it's making some deep cuts to its workforce. The company says that it's slashing 8,500 jobs worldwide. That's on top of some 7,500 cuts that were previously announced. Merck says this will all help it to save around about $1 billion next year. Not great news, of course, coming just 2 or 3 days ahead of the US jobs report, which will be out later on this week, and also on a day when European jobs numbers came out as well. And coming up next year on World Business Today, the casualties of the US government shutdown. We'll tell you about some key attractions where the doors are closed until Congress can agree on a spending plan.
To see a new world, we try. To see a new world, we explore. To see a new world, we don't give up. We try and try. Maybe it's because we want to see a new world. Let's try together, and let's go see a new world.
Azerbaijan, from A to Z.
The shutdown will affect some national parks will be shut down, some museums, some national monuments will be shut down. For example, down in Washington, they're going to close the Smithsonian Museum. So if you have tickets, forget it. You're not getting in. They're going to close the Smithsonian Museum. They're going to close the Air and Space Museum. You're not getting into there. They're closing the Hillary Clinton Pantsuit Museum. You're not going to go. Forget about that as well.
We got to have some fun with this. David Letterman is right. If you are looking to visit any of the Smithsonian museums today, you are out of luck. They are among the casualties of the shutdown. You're looking at live pictures right there. Nobody in line. The doors closed. The Smithsonian Institution has also pulled the plug on the pandas at the National Zoo. Don't worry, we're just talking about the TV plug. The brand new addition to the panda family, the still unnamed newborn cub, is still being fed and cared for. You just won't be able to access the Panda Cam online to see how they're doing. It's considered one of those non-essential programs that is being suspended during the shutdown, although I'm sure some workers out there looking for a little stress relief would disagree. And international landmark. Oh, sorry, Nina, that's you.
No, I was just about to say, it looks as though Mummy Panda Bear is certainly protecting her little unnamed cub from the US debt shutdown, irrespective of what's going on elsewhere around the world. Nice to see some cheery news there coming out of that webcam. And an international landmark, which you're seeing there live as well, is also not open to visitors today. The shutdown means that you can't visit the Liberty Island, home to the Statue of Liberty. Many tourists, I'm sure, will be extremely disappointed by that prospect because it looks as though the weather is absolutely delightful. Our very own Poppy Harlow is at the Statue of Liberty and joins us now live from that location. So, Poppy, how many national parks are we talking about, and how many people will be out of work as a result of these closures and disappointed tourists?
Hi there, Nina. As you said, it is an absolutely glorious day here in New York City. A perfect day for tourists to visit the Statue of Liberty, but they cannot because it is one of 401 national parks from coast to coast across this country that is shuttered today because of the government shutdown. We're talking about 21,379 federal parks employees that are out of work, that are home today, almost all of them except for those essential employees because of this. What we're looking at here also is a great loss in revenue for the U.S. government. Of all those parks, they bring in some $450,000 per day from admission fees, things like that. And when you look at visitors, I was astounded when I saw this number. 280 million people from all around the world visit our national parks in this country every single year. A ticket, for example, to the Statue of Liberty, we went yesterday, $17 for an adult. So just think about the money, the revenue that generates, and then the jobs, the people that are relying on this. And you know what? When you talk about the Statue of Liberty, it was slammed by Superstorm Sandy here, out for 8 months. It was closed, so the people there weren't working for those 8 months at the Statue of Liberty. They just get back on their feet, and then now they face another shutdown. And they're very, very upset, Nina, obviously, because the government workers don't know if they're going to get paid once Congress gets it together and reaches a deal. Whether or not they'll get back pay, that is still to be seen, Nina.
Yeah, and you're also talking about non-government employees. There are quite a few of those that work inside these parks and subcontract to them. What happens to them and their businesses as well?
I think that's such an important question because in the last government shutdowns, the federal workers did get back pay in the end. Congress voted to pay them. But workers at the concession stands, people that we met yesterday on Liberty Island that rent audio tours, for example, they're not going to get paid. These are hourly jobs, and when they're not working, making money for the companies that they work for, they're not going to get paid. And we talked to two of them, Victoria and Quinn, two young people relying on these jobs really without a plan B. Here's what they told us.
I'll have to find another job if they're not paying us while we're laid off or file for unemployment, but it's still not going to be enough.
Do you have a message for Washington?
Like this can have such a big impact on the people that aren't in the limelight, you know, the people that are working hourly positions at spots. This whole island will be shut down, so that's a ton of different positions that people won't be working or won't be getting paid for.
So as you hear from them, the ripple effects of this far, far beyond all the federal employees, Nina. It's really hurting folks without work.
All right, then, Poppy Harlow joining us there live from the Statue of Liberty. Thanks so much for that. We'd like to go over towards the other side of New York now, to the United Nations General Headquarters, where, as you can see there, Pak Kil-yon, the Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs for North Korea, has been addressing the General Assembly. Let's listen.
As the three objectives of UN activities. Ever since the inception of the United Nations, humankind has been aspiring to build a new, peaceful world free from war, and at the same time to achieve common prosperity and development based on cooperation amongst member states. This aspiration, however, is far from coming true, even after the change of a century and the passage of its first decade. High-handedness and arbitrariness are getting ever more rampant in international relations. Infringement of sovereignty, interference into internal affairs, and regime change continue to go unabated under the pretext of non-proliferation and human rights protection, for which the UN organization is being abused. Confrontation among forces of different interests, states, and civilizations, and wars large and small, keep taking place in different parts of the world, severely damaging the credibility of the United Nations, whose primary mission is to ensure peace and security. These developments clearly demonstrate that sustainable development and real protection of human rights are beyond imagination as long as there is no peace and security ensured as stipulated in the UN Charter. A specific state's high-handedness and arbitrariness undermining peace and security should be rejected in international relations with a view to achieve genuine cooperation and development amongst countries based on sovereign equality. Unjust intervention, pressure and use of force, what is unfolding in Syria in the form of infringements of its sovereignty and territorial integrity, further breaching peace and stability, should not be allowed in any case, and the U.S. blockades against Cuba should be brought to an end.